something was sitting alone in the middle of a dusty road. It was small, it was white, and it was dying. Every creature that passed by looked at it. Some stopped for a second. Then they walked away. Not one of them helped. Not one of them stayed. This happened again and again. For hours. In a world where strength meant everything, this tiny creature had none. It was born different. Born wrong, at least. That is what everyone around it believed. Its own kind had rejected it. Every animal in the land had ignored it. Even the sky above seemed to have forgotten it existed. But then, one figure appeared on that road, walking slowly, carrying a worn old bag. He was human. And in this world, humans were not known for their power, not for their magic, not for anything great. But this one human stopped. And what happened next would change everything, not just for this tiny white outcast, but for the entire world that had been watching from the shadows. This is not just a rescue story. This is a story about what happens when one small act of kindness breaks every rule broken world has made. This is a story about what it truly means to be powerful. And this is a story that will make you see the word human in a completely different way. 3 things in this story will shock you. The truth about what the white hatchling actually was. The secret the dragon world had buried for centuries. And the one moment that changed the course of everything. Let me show you exactly how this happened. The world of Verk was not kind to the weak. It never had been. Verk was a land of fire-breathing dragons, ancient magic, and iron mountains. The sky was wide and fierce. The valleys were deep. And in the spaces between the mountains and the rivers, enormous dragon clans ruled everything they could see. Dragons were the masters of Verk. They had been for thousands of years. They lived together in large groups called clutches. A clutch could have hundreds of dragons. Each one had a color. Gold dragons were the most powerful. Red dragons were the most feared. Black dragons were the most respected. Silver dragons were known for their wisdom. Blue dragons were known for their speed. Color meant everything in Verk. It told the world who you were. It told the world where you belonged. It told the world what you would become. Color was your identity, your rank, your entire future. Without the right color, you were nothing. Everyone in Verk understood this. No one questioned it. It was simply the way things were, the way they had always been. And then, one morning, something happened that nobody in the Crastvale clutch had ever seen before. A hatchling was born white. Not cream, not pale gold, not silver with a shimmer. Pure, snow, white. The mother dragon, a large red female named Serath, looked down at the cracked egg. For a long moment, she said nothing. The entire clutch went quiet. Every head turned. Every pair of eyes stared at the same thing. The tiny white hatchling blinked its bright teal-green eyes at the world for the very first time. It looked up at its mother with complete and total trust. Serath looked away. That single moment, that one quiet turning away, told the entire clutch everything they needed to know. This hatchling was not welcome here. This hatchling did not belong. In the dragon lore of Verk, a white hatchling was called an ashborn. White was the color of ash, and ash was what remained after fire destroyed something completely. The old dragon elders taught that an ashborn brought misfortune to any clutch that kept it. They said the white coloring meant the dragon carried no inner fire, no power, no future worth speaking of. The old stories were taken very seriously in Verk. Nobody questioned them. Nobody challenged them. They were simply accepted as truth, the kind of truth that nobody ever looked too closely at, because looking closely at old things can unsettle everything else built on top of them. The white hatchling had no name. In the Crastvale clutch, A name was given by the mother on the third day after hatching. It was a tradition as old as the clutch itself. But Sarath gave no name. She fed the other hatchlings with care. She nudged them close at night beneath her enormous red wings. She watched over them with fierce, constant attention. The white one was left at the far edge of the nest. At first, a few of the younger dragons looked at the small white hatchling with curiosity. It had the same body as the others, the same tiny wings folded against its sides, the same small curled horns just beginning to show. Its eyes, honestly, were quite remarkable, a deep shimmering green that caught the light and held it, like two small gemstones set into white stone. But whenever an elder noticed younger dragon drifting too close to the white hatchling, they were quickly pulled away, warned quietly, scolded, and the young dragons, not yet old enough to understand why, learned the lesson anyway. Stay away. Days passed. The white hatchling learned very quickly that food did not come to it. It had to wait. It had to search the edges of the nest for scraps after the others had eaten. It had to stay small, stay quiet, stay completely out of the way. It did not cry. It did not fight. It did not make demands. It simply waited, watching the others with those wide, quiet green eyes, watching them eat, watching them play, watching them curl together at night in warm piles while it lay alone at the edge of everything. By the end of the first week, the clutch prepared to move. The older dragons led the group toward a new feeding ground 3 valleys to the east. Everyone followed. The large ones moved first, shaking the ground with each step. The young ones scrambled after their mothers, bumping into each other, making small excited sounds. The white hatchling stood at the edge of the old nest and watched them go. It took 2 small steps forward, then stopped. Sarath did not look back. Not once. The hatchling stood there for a long time. The wind moved slowly through the empty valley. The sky above was wide and gray and enormous. Somewhere in the far distance, thunder rolled across the mountains, deep and slow, like the world itself exhaling. The hatchling was alone. It was too young to fully understand what had happened, too small for that kind of knowing. But it understood one thing, in the simple, honest way that young creatures understand hard truths before anyone has taught them not to. Nobody was coming back. It sat down in the sand. And it waited anyway. 3 days passed. The white hatchling stayed in the same place for most of that time. It moved only to search for small insects and dry grass seeds near the rocks. It drank from a thin stream a short distance away. At night it slept curled tightly against a large flat boulder that blocked the worst of the cold wind. It was alive, but only barely. On the 4th day, a pack of sandwolves came through the valley. They were lean, fast hunters with golden fur and sharp yellow eyes. They traveled in groups of 6 or 7, and they were not afraid of young dragons, even young ones from strong clutches. The lead wolf stopped when it saw the white hatchling sitting alone in the open sand. It tilted its head. It sniffed the air carefully. Then it took one slow step forward. The white hatchling did not run. It was too small to outrun a wolf, too weak to fight one. It simply looked up at the wolf with those wide green eyes. Not with anger, not with aggression, just with a quiet, steady sadness. The lead wolf stared at it for a long moment. Its yellow eyes moved across the small white creature carefully. Then it snorted, turned around, led the pack away in the other direction without making a sound. Nobody could say exactly why. Maybe the wolf sensed something unusual about the creature. Maybe it simply was not interested. Or maybe, just maybe, there was something in those eyes that gave even a predator pause. Something that made it feel, for just a moment, that attacking this particular creature would be a very wrong thing to do. Whatever the reason, The hatchling survived, but surviving alone was not the same as living. Over the days that followed, other creatures passed through. A slow herd of stone-backed tortoises moved through the valley, not glancing at the hatchling once. A pair of large, black-feathered carrion birds circled high overhead for several hours before eventually drifting away, as if whatever they saw below simply was not worth the effort of landing. One afternoon, a group of young fire lizards came skittering through the area. They were small dragon cousins, roughly the same size as the white hatchling. When it saw them, the hatchling stood up quickly. Its eyes brightened. It took several hopeful steps in their direction. The fire lizards saw it immediately. Their bright orange crests flattened against their heads. Their tails lashed sharply. They hissed in unison and scattered into the rocks, disappearing in seconds. The white hatchling stood very still. It looked at the empty space where they had been. Then it sat back down. This was its world now. This repeating pattern, approach, be ignored, be rejected, be left behind. It happened enough times that eventually the hatchling stopped approaching at all. It simply sat, watched from a careful distance, and waited. The days were growing hotter. The thin stream was beginning to dry up. The hatchling was losing weight. Its white scales, which had once been smooth and faintly bright, now had a dry, dusty appearance along the edges. Its wings hung limp against its sides. Its eyes, still that vivid green, had grown quieter, heavier. It was fading. And it seemed, in its own small way, to know it. On the 9th day after the clutch had left, the hatchling crawled to the edge of the ancient road that ran through the valley floor. It was a wide, flat road made of packed stone and old sand. Dragon carts and heavy trading wagons had traveled this road for hundreds of years. It connected 3 large dragon cities and was always busy with travelers and merchants. The hatchling knew none of this. It just knew the road was warmer than the ground behind it. The flat stones held the heat of the sun well into the late evening, and heat was something the hatchling badly needed. So it lay down on the road. It pressed its small white belly flat against the warm stone. It closed its eyes. Carts rolled past. Heavy wagons moved by, wheels grinding against the old stone. Travelers walked along both edges of the road. Every single one of them saw the white hatchling lying there. Every single one of them kept moving. Some glanced down. Some did not even bother with that. One large cartwheel passed less than 2 feet from its small head. The driver did not slow down. The hatchling did not move. It simply lay there. Small, white, alone, on a road where thousands passed. And not one stopped. Until one did. His name was Edric. He was not a dragon. He was not a powerful creature. He was not rich or famous or important by any standard that Verk respected. He was human. In the world of Verk, humans were considered the least significant beings alive. They had no fire, no wings, no ancient magic, no great history of conquest or power. Dragons barely acknowledged their existence. Most other creatures treated them as background noise, occasionally useful for small labor, but not worth real attention or real thought. Edric was 32 years old. He was a traveling repairman. He walked from city to city fixing broken things, cracked cartwheels, snapped tool handles, torn leather harnesses, bent iron fittings. He charged very little for his work. Most of the time he was paid in food rather than coin, and he accepted this without complaint. He carried a worn brown bag full of tools that he had collected and cared for over many years. He wore patched boots that had been mended so many times, the original leather was almost entirely gone. His jacket was faded and gray. His face was the kind face of a man who had lived simple, hard, and honest life without expecting anything from the world beyond what that life contained. He had been walking since before sunrise. He was heading toward the market city of Drenholm, roughly 2 days ahead. A wagon owner there needed 4 large wheels repaired before the harvest season began, and the job was already agreed on. He could not afford to be late. Edric always walked with his eyes on the road ahead of him. He had learned from long experience that roads in Verk held surprises, loose stones, dropped cargo, broken sections of old paving that could catch a foot at exactly the wrong angle. Attention cost nothing and prevented a great deal of trouble. He almost stepped directly on the white hatchling before he saw it. He stopped just in time. He looked down. The hatchling looked up at him. Neither of them moved for a moment. The road was quiet around them. There was a gap between travelers, a rare open space on the usually busy route. Edric crouched down slowly. He did not reach out right away. He studied the hatchling carefully first. He took in its white scales, the dry cracked edges, the thin frame, the way its ribs moved with each breath, shallow and very slow. He looked at its wings lying flat and wrong against the road stones. He looked at the overall stillness of it, the particular kind of stillness that belongs to things that have stopped believing help is coming. Then his eyes moved to its face. The hatchling was looking directly at him. Not with fear, not with aggression of any kind, just looking, with those vivid green eyes focused entirely on his face, as if he were the most interesting and confusing thing it had ever seen. Edric had no training in dragon care, no experience with hatchlings. He knew almost nothing about dragon biology or behavior. He was a repairman from a small human settlement on the western edge of nowhere in particular. But he knew what a dying creature looked like. He set his bag down on the road. He opened it and pulled out the cloth bundle that held his lunch, flat bread, a small portion of dried meat, and a sealed container of water. He broke off the smallest piece of bread he could manage. He held it out toward the hatchling at arm's length. His hand was completely steady. His movement stayed slow and calm. He made no sudden gestures. The hatchling looked at the bread. It did not move at first. Then, very slowly, it stretched its neck forward. It sniffed the bread carefully. Then it ate it. Edric let out a long, slow breath that he had not realized he was holding. He broke off another piece and held it out. The hatchling took it faster this time. Then another. After the third piece, the hatchling pushed itself upright from the road surface. Its legs were shaking, but it was standing. Its eyes were sharper now, more focused, more present. Edric opened his water container. He poured a careful amount into his cupped palm and tilted his hand slowly toward the hatchling. It lapped at the water fast. Desperately, he refilled his palm 3 times. When the hatchling finally lifted its head from the water, it simply looked at him. Behind them, a large dragon cart rolled past without slowing. The driver glanced down at the scene briefly. His expression carried no readable emotion. He looked at the white hatchling. He looked at Edric. Then he faced the road again and kept moving. Edric paid no attention to the cart. He was still looking at the hatchling. "You have been out here a while, haven't you?" he said softly. It was not really a question. Edric did not continue walking that day. He found a flat, sheltered space just off the road, protected on one side by a low rock ledge, and he made a camp there. He gathered dry grass and pieces of broken wood from the roadside and built a small, steady fire. He had done this hundreds of times before. His hands knew the work without needing to think about it. The white hatchling watched him from a few feet away. It had not exactly followed him to the campsite. But when Edric moved, it moved, always staying within a short distance. Close enough to see, not yet close enough to touch, but not willing to allow distance either. Edric noticed this. He said nothing about it. He simply kept his movements slow and his voice quiet. He warmed some of his dried meat over the fire and broke it into very small pieces. Without making a production of it, without even looking directly at the hatchling, he set a few small pieces on the flat rock beside him. He looked at the fire. A few minutes later, when he looked at the rock again, the pieces were gone. He set out more. Those disappeared too. He smiled slightly, just slightly. As the fire burned lower that evening, the white hatchling began to move closer. It did this in careful stages, one step. Stop completely. Watch Edric. Wait. One more step. This went on for several minutes, until finally it was sitting just beside the fire, close enough that the warm orange light caught its white scales and turned them into something glowing and soft. Edric sat on the other side of the fire. He ate his own food slowly. He did not stare at the hatchling. He did not reach toward it. He simply shared the space, the warmth, the quiet. After a while, the hatchling lay down. It curled its tail around itself carefully. Its eyes grew heavy. Its breathing deepened and slowed. Edric watched it for a moment. Then he reached slowly into his bag and found the cloth wrap he used to protect his most delicate tools. It was soft and worn from years of use, not much to look at, but clean and warm. He folded it gently and placed it near the hatchling without touching the creature. The hatchling stirred slightly. It looked at the cloth wrap with those half-open eyes. Then it shifted, just a small careful movement, and rested its chin on the edge of it. It went to sleep. Edric watched it for a long moment before eventually lying down himself. The Verk night was cold and full of distant sounds, the low rumble of faraway dragon calls, the wind moving through the mountain passes, the occasional sharp crack of stone shifting somewhere in the dark. These were sounds Edric knew well. But that night, something new started. Deep in the middle of the night, sound began that he had never heard before. It was a low vibration, almost like a hum, but deeper than that, something that seemed to come from inside the chest of the sleeping hatchling. It rose and fell in a slow, steady rhythm, quiet, constant, completely unlike any dragon sound Edric had ever heard at a distance. He woke slowly. He lay still and listened without moving. It was not fire. It was not a growl. It was not a cry. It was something entirely different. Something that felt older than sound, somehow, as if it had been made before language existed, as if it was communicating something that words had never been built to carry. He lay there listening to it for a long time. And somehow, as strange and impossible as it should have seemed, for a practical man sleeping on hard stone beside a creature that had no reason to trust him, that sound was the most calming thing he had heard in years. He fell back to sleep easily. In the morning, the hatchling was still there. It was already awake when Edric opened his eyes. Sitting upright, watching him with those green eyes. When he sat up and looked at it, it made a single short sound. Not a hiss. Not any kind of warning. Something smaller and quieter than either of those things. Edric rubbed his face. "Still here," he said quietly. The hatchling blinked once. Edric packed his camp. He shouldered his bag. He stood on the road and looked south toward Drenholm, 2 days away. A job waiting, a normal life waiting exactly where he had left it. He looked down at the hatchling. It looked back at him without moving. He stood there for a moment. Then he exhaled slowly. "All right," he said. He started walking. The hatchling walked beside him. The walk to Drenholm was long, but it did not feel the way long walks usually felt. The white hatchling stayed beside him the entire way. Sometimes it walked. Sometimes, when the ground became too rough or too hot beneath its still healing feet, Edric let it ride on his shoulder. It was a strange and unexpected wait. But after the first few miles, it felt surprisingly natural, like something that had simply always been part of his walking. People stared. Other travelers on the road stopped and looked. Cart drivers slowed to watch as they passed. Two gold dragons mounted high above on great flying creatures looked down from the sky as they passed overhead. Some of the people Edric walked past looked confused. Some looked uncomfortable. A few laughed, not the warm kind of laughter. A human carrying a white hatchling was not a common sight on the roads of Verk. By the standards of that world, it was not a respectable sight either. On the afternoon of the first day, an older dragon traveler, a heavy-set elder with gray-green scales and a carved wooden walking staff, stopped directly in front of Edric on the road. He planted himself in the middle of the path and looked at the pair with an expression that was somewhere between pity and irritation. "You know what that creature is," the elder said. It was not a question. It had the tone of warning delivered to someone who should already know better. "Yes," Edric said. "An Ashborn," the elder said. "Bad luck. No fire. No future. Your kind picking up what our kind leaves behind." He shook his head slowly. "You are wasting your care on something that will never become anything worth caring about." Edric looked at the white hatchling on his shoulder. It had gone completely still. Its eyes were fixed on the elder, not with fear, not with anger, but with that same quiet knowing look, as if it understood perfectly well that it was being discussed, and had heard versions of this conversation before. "Maybe," Edric said simply. He stepped around the elder and kept walking. The elder watched them go, then turned and continued on his own road without another word. They arrived in Drenholm just before evening on the second day. Drenholm was a large and busy trading city, wide stone streets, crowded market stalls, dragons of every color moving through the noise and the light. The smell of cooked food and animals and iron filled the air from every direction. The white hatchling pressed close against Edric's side as they entered. Its eyes were enormous, moving constantly, taking in the scale and the noise and the crowds, the sheer, overwhelming amount of everything. Edric took it to the inn at the edge of the market district, where he always stayed when working in Drenholm. It was a small plain place run by an older human woman named Marit, a practical, sharp person who asked few questions and kept good rooms. Marit opened the door. She looked at Edric. Then she looked at the white hatchling beside him. She said nothing for a moment. "No," she finally said. "Just a few nights," Edric said. "Edric, it is a dragon. A small one. They do not stay small." "Marit." She looked at the hatchling again. The hatchling looked up at her with those enormous green eyes, completely calm, completely direct. Marit was quiet for a long moment. "The shed," she said at last. "Not inside the main house. It stays in the shed." "That is fine," Edric said. The shed was clean and dry. It had a thick straw floor and a single small window that let in the morning light. Edric set up his bedroll there without complaint. The hatchling explored every corner in careful, methodical detail, sniffing each wall, each beam, each corner of the floor, before returning and settling beside him. That evening, while Edric worked on the first of the wagon wheels by lantern light, Marit came and stood in the shed doorway. She watched the hatchling, which was sitting close to Edric's working space. Every time a small bolt or a ring piece rolled away across the floor, the hatchling would push it back toward Edric with its nose. Not trained to do this. Not asked. Simply doing it because it was watching, learning, understanding what the work required. Marit watched this for a while without speaking. "It is learning everything you do," she said finally. "I know," Edric said. He did not look up from the wheel. She was quiet again. "Learning," she said softly, more to herself than to him. Edric kept working. But in his mind, he was back on the road. Back at the moment he had almost walked past, he was thinking about all the carts that had rolled by the white hatchling on that road. All the creatures that had seen it and kept moving. All the eyes that had looked and decided, without stopping, without knowing that what they were looking at was not worth their time. He looked at the hatchling as it pushed another small piece of hardware carefully back toward his hand. He thought about the elder on the road. No future. Never become anything worth caring about. He thought about the one thing nobody had done. Stopped. 6 months passed. The white hatchling stayed. Not because Edric required it. Not because it was kept or controlled or had no choice. It stayed because it decided to. Every morning it was there when he woke. Every evening it was there when he stopped walking. Wherever Edric went in those 6 months, the hatchling moved beside him. Down roads, through markets, in and out of repair yards and storage warehouses and small inns across 3 different cities. It grew. Slowly, albino hatchlings, reportedly, developed at a different pace than others. But the growth was steady and visible. Its white scales, which had been dry and cracked from those terrible days alone on the road, gradually filled out into something firm and smooth, with a faint depth to the whiteness, layers of pale shimmer that shifted slightly when the light moved across it. Its wings, which had hung so limp and wrong at the start, had grown stronger with daily use. Edric had noticed early on that the hatchling liked to open them wide in the morning sun. He made a habit of finding open spaces wherever they camped, just so it could do this. It was such a small thing. It cost him almost nothing. But the hatchling always seemed to know he had done it on purpose. It learned other things quickly, more quickly than Edric would have predicted. It knew his routine completely. It knew which tools he would reach for before his hand moved toward the bag. It knew his moods when he was tired, when something was wrong, when he was quietly worried about something he had not spoken aloud. On those heavy evenings, it would press its side firmly against his, and that low vibration would begin again. The same sound from that first night, rising and falling slowly, filling the quiet with something steadier than silence. Edric had eventually asked around about the sound. He did this carefully, without drawing attention, mentioning it casually to a few older scholars and historians he came across in his travels. One elderly human scholar in a Drenholm library gave him the closest thing to an answer. He said it quietly, with the careful manner of someone sharing something they were not entirely sure they were allowed to discuss. He said there were very old records, not dragon lore, not the lore written by dragon scholars, but something much older, predating the dragon civilization entirely, that described something called resonance singing. According to these records, it was a form of deep communication. Not words, not fire, something older than both. A vibration used between creatures to share calm, to signal safety, to say something that had no words but needed to be said. Something that translated, roughly, as, "I am here. You are not alone." The scholar noted carefully that these records were considered myth by most serious historians. Edric thanked him and walked out into the evening. The hatchling was waiting outside the library door. Edric stopped and looked at it for a long moment. Then he said, very quietly, "I am here. You are not alone." The hatchling made that small, soft sound. Word spread through Drenholm over those months. There was a human repairman who traveled everywhere with a white dragon. People noticed. They talked. They argued. Some said it was wrong. Some said it was foolish. Some said no good would ever come from a human bonding with an Ashborn. But then, one afternoon in the main market, something happened that nobody had predicted. A young gold dragon hatchling, small, barely past hatching age, got separated from its mother in the midday crowd. The market was packed and loud. The gold hatchling panicked completely. It darted between legs and cart wheels in a blind, terrified run, crying in sharp, piercing sounds, crashing into market stalls. The white hatchling saw it from across the market. It did not hesitate. It did not look at Edric for permission. It did not wait or consider. It moved, fast and low, cutting straight through the crowd. It reached the gold hatchling before anyone else could. It did not bite, did not hiss, did not make any aggressive movement. It pressed its white side firmly and gently against the gold hatchling. And it began to hum. That vibration, that resonant singing, rising and falling slowly, completely calm. The gold hatchling went still. Its panicked breathing slowed. Its legs stopped trembling. Its crying stopped. Within 30 seconds, it was calm. Its mother, a large, powerful gold dragon, landed heavily in the market street with a crack of stone underfoot. Her eyes were wide and fierce. She scanned the scene fast, ready to strike, ready to destroy whatever had frightened her child. She saw the white dragon, small, pressed gently against her child, humming softly. She went completely still. She watched without moving for a long moment. Then she lowered her enormous head. Not an attack. Not a warning. A bow. The entire market went quiet. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned. Every eye was fixed on the same image. A powerful gold dragon bowing her head toward a small white Ashborn who had done the one thing no one else had moved to do. Edric stood in the crowd. He watched all of it unfold. He felt something he had not expected to feel, not pride. Exactly. Not pride as he knew it. Something deeper and quieter than that. Something closer to recognition. He thought about a road. A dusty, ordinary road in an empty valley. A tiny white creature lying alone in the sand. Thousands of eyes passing by. Nobody stopping. Nobody staying. The whole world deciding, without a second thought, that what it was looking at was not worth the interruption. He thought about everything that had been sitting there, waiting, in that small abandoned creature. He thought about what would have been permanently lost if he had kept walking. Here is the part that stays with you. After the market, after the gold dragon's bow, after the crowd stood there in that long, heavy silence, one of the senior dragon historians of Drenholm requested to see the white hatchling. This was not a common thing. These scholars rarely left their libraries for anything. The fact that this one did told everyone paying attention that something significant had just happened. The historian examined the hatchling carefully for nearly an hour. He studied its scales up close. He listened to the resonant singing. He opened a locked case he had brought with him and consulted several texts that appeared to be extremely old, the kind of old that meant they had survived things that destroyed most other records. Then he made a statement that left everyone in the room completely silent. He said that according to the oldest pre-civilization dragon records, the ones that most serious scholars had long dismissed as legend, white dragons were not Ashborn. That name, that word, that meaning attached to it had been created by later dragon society. It appeared in the historical record only centuries after the original ancient texts were written. It was not original. It was not true. In the original records, white dragons were called by a different name entirely. They were called Vethkari, which translated, roughly, to first voice. According to the ancient texts, Vethkari dragons were not failures of nature. They were not omens of bad luck. They were not creatures without fire or future. They were, according to the oldest records that existed, the original communicators, the dragons born with the deepest and most natural capacity for resonant singing. They were once considered the most essential members of any clutch. Not for their fighting, not for their flame, for their ability to hold a group together, to calm panic, to cross the distance between different creatures and make genuine connection where nothing else could. They had been misunderstood, then slowly forgotten, then turned into myth, then turned into an insult that an entire civilization repeated without ever checking where it came from. Centuries of a lie built on top of a forgotten truth. All because the world had stopped recognizing what quiet strength actually looked like. A repairman with patched boots and a worn bag had not stopped recognizing it. He had not known any of this. Of course, he had known nothing about Vethkari or resonance singing or pre-civilization records. He had simply seen a small creature dying on a road. And he had simply stopped. In stopping, in that one completely ordinary, completely unheroic act, he had saved something the world had written off as worthless. Something that turned out to be extraordinary. The story of Edric and the white hatchling spread far beyond Drenholm in the months that followed. It reached other cities, other clutches. It was told and retold, as stories like this tend to be. And in every version of the story, across every telling, the part people remembered most was not the market, not the historian's revelation, not the gold dragon's bow. It was the road. It was the fact that thousands had passed by, and one had stopped. If this opened your eyes, if this landed somewhere inside you, then you already understand what this story is really about. It was never really about dragons. It was never about a fantasy world. It was about what we walk past every single day. This story carries something real inside it. In a world that constantly rewards strength, speed, power, and noise, there was a tiny white creature that had none of those things. Born different, abandoned by those who should have protected it, ignored by a world moving too fast to notice what it was losing, labeled worthless by an old lie nobody had ever thought to question. And it was saved by someone that same world considered the least important being alive. Not a warrior, not a ruler, not a creature of great magic or great fire. Just a human, with old boots and a bag full of tools, and nowhere particularly important to be. Think about that for a moment. Think about the people in your own life, the ones who have been written off, the ones who do not fit the expected shape, the ones sitting quietly in places where others walk past without slowing. Think about the value that gets dismissed every single day, because it does not look the way power is supposed to look. Think about how many Vethkari are sitting in the sand right now, not in a fantasy world, but in this one, waiting for someone to simply notice. And think about the times you almost kept walking. Because stopping is almost never convenient. It almost never fits perfectly into the plan of the day. There is always somewhere to be. Always something waiting. Always a reason to keep moving. The road is always busy. The calendar is always full. The justifications are always right there, ready and reasonable. But this story asks one quiet, persistent question. What are you walking past? Here is your one question for the community today, and we genuinely want to know your answer. So please drop it in the comments right now. Has someone ever stopped for you when they had every reason not to? When it would have been easier to keep walking? What did that moment mean to you? Every single comment on this channel gets read. Everyone. This community is built on those stories, and yours matters here. If this video moved something in you, hit that like button right now. It takes 1 second, and it tells us you want more stories like this one on your feed. Subscribe to this channel if you have not yet. We bring you HFY stories, humanity stories, that remind you what ordinary people are genuinely capable of in any world, real or imagined. And if you are ready for the next one, it is waiting for you right now on the end screen. Another story, another world, another moment where the least likely person does the most important thing. Because that is what this channel is about. The world is full of white hatchlings sitting in the sand. The world is full of roads with thousands of footsteps passing by. Be the one who stops. Thank you for watching. We will see you in the next one.